Under the wide sweep of the Montana sky, the sun was dipping low, spilling a rusty glow over the rolling plains. The air carried the dry scent of dust and old timber, the kind that clung to a man's clothes long after the day's work was done. The wind moved slow through the tall grass, whispering through the fence posts and stirring the last few leaves hanging on the cottonwoods near the creek. It was late autumn 1887, and the land had a quietness to it, like it was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. The ranch sat on a stretch of land miles away from the nearest town, a place called Willow Bend. Folks there were the kind that worked hard, spoke little, and minded their own business. They lived by the rhythm of the land, by sunrise and sunset, by the sound of the cattle moving through the pastures and the creak of saddle leather in the morning chill. But under that quiet, the land kept secrets, and sometimes those secrets had a way of finding their way to the surface. He was known around those parts simply as the rancher, a man of few words, weathered from years under the open sky and hardened by loss that he never spoke of. His days were simple: feed the horses, ride the fence line, tend to the herd. But there was something in his eyes that gave away more than he ever said out loud. It wasn't loneliness exactly, it was something deeper, a kind of tiredness that came from watching too many things break and not having the strength to fix them anymore. That evening, as the last of the light faded from the fields, he was bringing in the mare from the lower pasture when he heard something. It wasn't the wind or the coyotes calling from the hills. It was a sound that didn't belong there. A voice, faint and trembling, carried across the still air. He stopped, pulling back on the reins, listening. "Please, don't hurt me." The words drifted through the dusk, soft but sharp enough to cut through the quiet. His pulse kicked up. He looked around, scanning the line of trees near the creek bed. The mare shifted uneasily beneath him, ears twitching toward the sound. He heard it again, this time clearer, desperate. "Please." "I didn't mean to." He dismounted quickly, boots crunching on dry grass. The fading sun threw long shadows across the land, stretching them thin and dark. Every sound seemed louder: the rustle of the grass, the faint splash of water down in the creek, the wind sighing through the trees. He moved quietly, one hand resting on the worn handle of his revolver, more out of habit than intent. He didn't know what he was walking into, only that something wasn't right. Down near the edge of the creek, where the reeds grew thick and the ground turned soft, he saw them. At first just shapes in the half-light. A man's outline, tall and broad, standing too close to someone smaller, cornered against the bank. The smaller figure, he realized now it was a woman, was holding her hands up as if trying to shield herself. Her hair had come loose, catching the dying sunlight like threads of fire. "Please, don't hurt me," she cried again, her voice shaking. The rancher froze. His heart pounded against his ribs, and for a moment he couldn't move. The man standing over her said something low, too quiet to make out, but his tone carried a threat that made the rancher's stomach twist. He took a step forward, then stopped. His instincts told him to act, but another part of him, older, more cautious, warned him to wait. He'd seen how fast things could turn ugly out here, how a wrong move could change everything. He watched, breath held, trying to understand what was happening. The man's hand jerked forward, grabbing the woman's arm roughly. She struggled, her boot slipping in the mud. The rancher's hand tightened around the revolver. He could feel the cool metal against his palm, the weight of it grounding him. "Let her go," he wanted to shout, but the words wouldn't come. His throat felt dry, his voice caught somewhere between fear and fury. The scene before him seemed to move in slow motion, the man pulling her closer, the woman's cry cutting through the dusk, the echo of water splashing at their feet. The rancher stepped closer, silent as he could, every sense alert. He was close enough now to see the man's face, half-shadowed but angry, and the terror in the woman's eyes. Then something unexpected happened. The man turned suddenly as if sensing he wasn't alone. His gaze swept across the creek, landing on the rancher's figure standing partly hidden among the reeds. For a split second, no one moved. The air felt charged, thick with tension. The rancher's hand hovered near his holster, his mind racing. He didn't want to draw unless he had to. Violence had a way of sticking to a man out here, long after the dust settled. But the woman's eyes met his, wide and pleading, and that was enough to break his hesitation. He stepped forward, voice steady but low. "That's enough," the man's shoulders stiffened. "Ain't your concern," he growled, tightening his grip on the woman's arm. It is now. For a moment, it seemed like neither of them would move. The silence between them stretched, broken only by the distant cry of a hawk, and the sound of the creek slipping over stones. The woman winced, trying to pull free, but the man held fast. The rancher took another step forward, close enough now that the fading light revealed more of her face, dust-streaked, frightened, but alive. There was something about her that caught him off guard, something familiar he couldn't quite place. The man snarled. "You best walk away, friend. This here's none of your doing." The rancher's voice hardened. "You let her go, or I'll make it mine." The man hesitated, then with a sudden motion shoved the woman aside and turned as if to reach for something at his belt. The rancher's instincts kicked in. His hand moved before his thoughts could catch up, the revolver clearing leather in a smooth, practiced motion. But before he could speak, before he could warn the man, the woman stumbled backward into the creek, her foot catching a rock. She fell hard, water splashing high around her. The man froze, startled, then turned again toward the rancher. Time seemed to stop. The rancher could hear the beating of his own heart, the slow rush of the water, the creak of the leather strap on his holster. Everything else fell away, the wind, the sunset, the world itself narrowing to that one tense moment. He didn't know yet who she was, or what had brought her out here, miles from any town. He didn't know what the man wanted or why he'd been so desperate. All he knew was that something about this night was about to change everything. The woman gasped, pushing herself up, her dress heavy with water. She looked toward him again, her eyes full of fear and trust, the kind that left a mark on a man's soul. The rancher took a slow breath, lowering his revolver just an inch, unsure what came next. The man's hand twitched toward his belt. The rancher stiffened. And then, a single sound split the stillness of the evening. A gunshot. The mare in the distance neighed and bolted. The woman cried out. The rancher felt the air shift, smelled the sharp tang of gunpowder. His eyes darted between the woman, the man, and the rising mist from the creek. He couldn't tell yet who had fired. He just knew that the quiet life he'd been living out on that lonely stretch of land was over, and as the wind carried the echo of the shot across the empty plains, the rancher stood frozen, caught between what he'd seen and what he couldn't yet understand. The world around him seemed to hold its breath once more. The sound of the gunshot still hung in the air, echoing across the empty plains like thunder trapped between the hills. The rancher's ears rang, his breath caught in his chest. For a moment no one moved. The faint smell of gunpowder drifted through the cooling air, mixing with the damp scent of the creek. The sun had nearly disappeared now, leaving only streaks of pale red light sliding across the sky. The man near the creek stumbled backward, clutching at his shoulder. The rancher saw the dark stain spreading across the man's shirt and realized the shot hadn't come from him. He hadn't fired. He hadn't even pulled the trigger. His revolver was still steady in his hand, but his mind was reeling. The woman screamed softly, the sound breaking the stillness. She was kneeling in the shallow water, her hands trembling as she stared between the two men. The wounded man cursed under his breath, staggering toward the trees. The rancher started after him, but stopped when he saw the woman trying to stand. "Stay back," she said quickly, her voice shaking. "Please, don't come closer." He froze, lowering his revolver. The fear in her eyes wasn't only from the man who had hurt her. It was something deeper, something that made the rancher's stomach twist. "You're safe now," he said quietly, keeping his tone calm. "I ain't gonna hurt you." But she didn't look convinced. She took a step back, nearly losing her footing again in the mud. Her dress clung to her legs, heavy and soaked, her hair plastered to her face. She looked young, no more than her early 20s, though her eyes carried a kind of weariness that came from too much hardship. The wounded man had vanished into the trees, leaving a faint trail of blood in the fading light. The rancher knew he should follow, but something about the woman held him there. She was shaking, her lips pale, her breath short. "You need to get out of the water," he said gently. "It's getting cold." "Let me help." She hesitated, glancing toward the trees where the man had gone. Then slowly she nodded. The rancher holstered his revolver and stepped forward carefully, reaching out a hand. After a moment's pause, she took it. Her fingers were cold and trembling. He led her up the bank and toward the fence line, where his horse waited nervously. The mare snorted, stamping her hooves, still spooked by the noise. The rancher draped his coat around the woman's shoulders, the heavy fabric almost swallowing her small frame. "Who was he?" he asked quietly. She didn't answer right away. Her eyes were fixed on the horizon, where the last light was slipping away. "I don't know," she finally whispered. "I was walking, and he came out of nowhere. I tried to get away, but—" Her voice faltered. She looked down. clutching the coat tighter around herself. The rancher studied her for a moment. Her words didn't quite add up, but he could see she was too shaken to say more. Whatever had happened, it wasn't something she wanted to talk about. Not yet. He glanced toward the trees again. The man had disappeared completely now, but he wouldn't get far in his condition. Still, the rancher knew better than to chase a wounded stranger through the dark. Out here, that was a good way to get killed. "Come on," he said finally. "My place is a mile up the ridge. You can warm up there and we'll figure out what to do come morning." She hesitated. "I don't want to cause trouble." He gave a short nod. "You already got trouble, ma'am. Best not face it out here in the dark." They started walking toward the ranch, the mare following behind, her reins dragging softly in the grass. The night settled around them, cool and quiet except for the crunch of boots on dry earth. The stars began to show, first one, then another, until the whole sky seemed to shimmer above them. The ranch house came into view after a while, its outline faint against the hills. It wasn't much, just weathered wood and a stone chimney, but it was solid and safe. Smoke curled slowly from the chimney, carrying the smell of pine and old coffee. Inside, the rancher lit a lantern, its glow filling the room with a soft amber light. The woman stood near the doorway, still holding the coat tight around her. "You can sit," he said, nodding toward the chair by the fire. She hesitated again, then stepped forward slowly, her boots leaving small wet prints across the floor. She sat down, and he could see how tired she was. Whatever had happened before he found her, it had drained her completely. He poured a cup of coffee and handed it to her. She took it with both hands, her fingers still shaking slightly. "Thank you," she murmured. He nodded. "You got a name?" She hesitated, her eyes flickering toward the window as if checking for someone outside. "Lydia," she said softly after a moment. The name hung in the air. The rancher nodded slowly. "All right, Lydia, you can rest here tonight. I'll keep watch in case that man comes back." Her eyes widened slightly. "You think he will?" He looked into the fire, watching the flames twist and dance. "Men like that don't give up easy. But if he does, he won't get far." Lydia sipped the coffee, her gaze distant. For a while, neither of them spoke. The fire crackled softly, filling the silence between them. After a time, she said quietly, "You shouldn't have helped me." "It's not safe." The rancher turned his head. "What do you mean?" She hesitated, her fingers tightening around the cup. "He's not alone," she said finally. "There are others. I think they're looking for me." His jaw tightened. "Why?" Her voice dropped lower. "I saw something I wasn't supposed to." That was all she said. The words hung there, heavy and uncertain. The rancher didn't press her. He knew what it was like to carry something too heavy to share. He just nodded and stirred the fire. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the loose shutters. The sound made both of them look toward the door. The rancher stood, moving to check the latch. He peered out through the small window beside it, scanning the dark yard. Nothing moved. Just the faint sway of the tall grass and the shadow of the barn against the moonlight. When he turned back, Lydia was staring into the flames again, her expression distant. "You live here alone?" she asked softly. "Most of the time," he said. "Had a hand or two before, but they moved on." "You don't mind it? The quiet?" He shrugged. "Quiet's the only thing that doesn't lie to you." She gave a faint, sad smile at that, then looked away. The night deepened, and the air inside the cabin grew still. After a while, Lydia's eyes grew heavy, and she drifted to sleep in the chair, the firelight flickering over her tired face. The rancher sat across from her, watching the flames and listening to the wind outside. He couldn't shake the feeling that she was hiding something. The story she'd told didn't fit right. People didn't just wander into trouble like that, not out here, not without a reason. But he could also see the fear in her, real and raw. Whatever she'd seen, or whoever she was running from, it had marked her deep. When the fire burned low, he rose quietly, took his rifle, and stepped outside. The moon had climbed high, casting a silver glow across the land. The air was cold, sharp in his lungs. He walked to the edge of the porch and stood there, eyes scanning the dark. Somewhere out beyond the barn, a coyote yipped, answered by another farther off. But beneath that, there was something else, a faint crunch of footsteps in the distance. He tensed, raising the rifle slightly. The sound came again, closer this time. A shadow moved near the fence line, quick, low, deliberate. The rancher's pulse quickened. He took a quiet step forward, peering through the moonlight. For a moment, he saw nothing. Then, just beyond the gate, he caught the glint of something, metal catching the light. Someone was out there, watching. He lowered the rifle slightly, not wanting to give himself away too soon. Whoever it was, they weren't moving toward the house, not yet. Just standing, waiting. The wind shifted, carrying a whisper of words he couldn't make out. Then the shadow turned and disappeared into the darkness beyond the hill. The rancher stood there for a long moment, staring after it, until the silence of the plain swallowed everything again. When he finally went back inside, Lydia was still asleep, her face peaceful for the first time since he'd found her. He added another log to the fire and sat back down, but his mind was racing. The man by the creek hadn't been alone, and whoever else was out there, they knew where to look. He glanced once more toward the window. The plains were quiet again, but he knew better than to trust that kind of quiet. Out here, danger had a way of coming slow, like a storm building far off the horizon, and when it finally broke, it never came alone. The morning came slow, with a thin mist curling across the plains. The rancher hadn't slept much. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of wind outside kept him awake. He sat at the table with a cup of coffee gone cold, staring out the window toward the hills. The land looked calm, but he knew better. Somewhere out there, someone was waiting. Lydia stirred in the chair by the fire, blinking against the pale light. Her face was drawn and tired, but she looked steadier than she had the night before. She glanced toward the rancher, her voice barely above a whisper. "You stayed up all night?" He nodded without turning. Didn't seem right to sleep. She looked at him for a long moment, then lowered her eyes. "You saw someone out there, didn't you?" The rancher finally met her gaze. "Yeah, fence line just before dawn. Didn't get close enough to see his face, but he wasn't passing through." Her hands tightened around the edge of the blanket he'd given her. "They found me," she said softly. He leaned back in his chair. "You keep saying they. Who are you talking about?" Lydia looked toward the fire, her expression shadowed. "A man named Carver," she said finally. "He runs a freight company out of Silver Junction, but he's more than that. He's got men in every town from here to Helena, the kind that do his bidding without asking questions." The rancher frowned. "And what's he want with you?" She hesitated, biting her lip. "I worked at the depot office for a while, writing invoices, keeping track of shipments. I saw papers I wasn't supposed to. Carver's been moving goods that don't belong to him. Livestock, equipment, even rifles meant for the army." He rubbed a hand over his jaw, eyes narrowing. "And you tried to stop him?" "I tried to tell someone," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "But word got out before I could. He sent his men after me. That's who you saw last night." The rancher stood slowly, pacing toward the window. The sky was brightening, streaks of gold cutting through the mist. He didn't doubt her. Her fear was too real. But he also knew what this meant. Trouble had followed her straight into his quiet life, and it wasn't the kind that left easy. "You can't stay here long," he said finally. "They'll search this way again." "I know," she said quietly. "But I can't go back out there, not yet." He nodded slowly. "Then we'll need to be ready when they come." The next few hours passed with a heavy stillness. The rancher saddled his horse and rode out to the ridge, scanning the land for any sign of movement. The plain stretched far and empty, but now every shadow looked suspicious. Every bird's call made him tense. He checked the fence line, found tracks in the dirt near the north boundary, fresh boot prints, 3 sets heading toward the creek. When he returned, Lydia was outside, hanging laundry she'd washed in a tin basin. The morning sun caught her hair, and for a moment the rancher saw something almost peaceful in the scene. But the peace didn't last long. "Someone's been near the creek again," he said. 3 men, maybe 4. Didn't get close to the house, but they're circling." Lydia's hand stilled on the wet fabric. "They won't stop." He looked at her. "You said Carver runs freight. He's not just after you for talk, is he?" "There's something else." She hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Before I left, I took something. Proof of what he's done. Papers with names, locations, everything. I thought if I could get them to the marshal in Miles City. But you didn't make it," he finished for her. She shook her head. "He sent men after me before I got that far. I've kept the papers hidden." The rancher's brow furrowed. "Hidden where?" Her eyes met his, steady now. "Someplace close, but I won't say unless I have to." He respected that. Whatever she carried, it was enough to get her killed. He just wished he'd known before she brought it to his doorstep. The day stretched on, quiet but uneasy. The rancher worked near the barn, repairing the corral fence, but his thoughts kept circling back to the night before. Lydia stayed close to the cabin, helping where she could. though he could see her watching the horizon every few minutes, expecting movement. By afternoon, the wind had picked up. The sky turned gray, the kind of color that warned of rain. He was checking the horses when he saw something far off, dust rising on the trail from the east. A rider, maybe two. He squinted against the light, his stomach tightening. Whoever they were, they rode slow, deliberate, not like travelers passing through. He wiped his hands on his trousers and went inside. "Lydia," he said quietly, "you might want to stay out of sight." Her face paled. "They're here?" "Could be. I'll find out." She nodded quickly and stepped into the small storage room at the back of the cabin. He waited until he heard the latch click before stepping outside. The riders came into view a few minutes later. Two men, both dressed in trail-worn dusters, hats pulled low. Their horses were strong, their saddles clean. They didn't look like drifters. "Morning," the rancher called out evenly as they stopped a few yards from the porch. The taller man tipped his hat slightly. "Morning. You the owner here?" "That's right," the rancher said. "Something I can do for you?" The man smiled faintly, though his eyes stayed cold. "Name's Dyer. Me and my partner are with Carver Freight out of Silver Junction. We're looking for someone. Thought maybe you'd seen her pass through." The rancher kept his face calm. "Don't get many folks this way." Dyer's smile didn't move. "She's hard to miss. Young woman, dark hair, traveling alone. Might be hurt. Boss just wants to make sure she's safe." "I'll bet he does," the rancher said quietly. The man's gaze sharpened. "That a problem, friend?" "Not unless you make it one." For a moment, the air between them went still. Then Dyer chuckled softly. "No need for that. We'll be on our way soon enough. Just thought we'd ask around." The rancher nodded slowly. "Trails open west of here. You won't find anyone on my land." Dyer tipped his hat again, but his eyes lingered on the cabin a moment too long before turning his horse. "Appreciate the help. You see her, you let us know. Wouldn't want her getting lost out here." The two men rode off slowly, following the fence line until they disappeared behind the ridge. The rancher waited until the dust settled before going back inside. Lydia was standing in the doorway of the back room, her face pale. "That was them, wasn't it?" He nodded. "Said their boss was worried about you." "I didn't much believe him." She sank into the chair by the table, pressing a hand to her forehead. "They won't stop until they find me." He poured her a cup of water and set it in front of her. "Then we'll make sure they don't." She looked up at him, fear flickering behind her eyes. "You don't understand. Carver's got money, men, influence. If he finds out you helped me, I've dealt with worse than him," the rancher said, his voice calm but firm. "And I ain't about to stand by while someone gets hunted like an animal." For a moment, neither spoke. The wind howled softly outside, rattling the windows. Then slowly, Lydia reached into her dress pocket and pulled out a small folded paper. She set it on the table between them. "I kept one page," she said quietly. "If something happens to me, you'll know it's true." He unfolded the paper carefully. It was a ledger, handwritten numbers, shipping codes, and a name scrawled at the bottom. His brow furrowed. "These are army routes," he said. "Carver's been stealing government supplies?" She nodded. "And selling them through a buyer down south. If I can get the rest of the pages to the marshal, he'll have enough to bring Carver down." The rancher folded the paper again and slid it into his shirt pocket. "Then that's what we'll do." Before Lydia could answer, a noise outside made them both freeze. The faint creak of wood, a step on the porch. The rancher's hand went to his revolver. He motioned for Lydia to stay quiet, then moved toward the door. He waited, listening. The sound came again, a slow, deliberate movement. Then silence. He threw open the door. Nothing. The yard was empty, the wind stirring the grass. He stepped out, scanning the open land. Then he saw it, something small wedged between the boards of the porch, a playing card. He bent down, turning it over in his hand. The Queen of Spades. On the back, written in charcoal, were two words: "We found you." His pulse quickened. He looked toward the distant ridge, where the sun was dipping low again, throwing long shadows across the plains. Somewhere out there, men were waiting, watching. He slipped the card into his pocket and went back inside, his expression grim. Lydia saw his face and didn't need to ask. "They're coming, aren't they?" she whispered. He nodded. "They know you're here." The fire crackled softly between them, but it did nothing to warm the cold that had settled in the room. The rancher glanced toward the window once more. The quiet life he'd been trying to hold on to was slipping away fast, and this time there was no riding clear of it. The evening came down heavy, the sky bruised and darkening fast over the Montana plains. The wind had a bite to it, carrying the scent of rain and distant thunder. The rancher stood on the porch, the playing card still in his hand, feeling the weight of it like a warning. He knew what it meant. Carver's men weren't just watching anymore. They were closing in. Inside, Lydia was pacing near the window, her arms wrapped around herself. The firelight flickered across her face, showing the worry she tried to hide. "How long do you think we have?" she asked quietly. "Not long," he said. "They left that card so we'd know. Means they're close enough to play with us." She swallowed hard. "Then we should go, tonight." He shook his head. "They'd expect that. The trails'll be watched. Best we stay put till morning, then ride north. There's an old trail through the canyon. Not many know it. But what if they come before then?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. He looked out toward the open land beyond the barn, where the wind moved in long, restless waves through the grass. "Then we make sure they regret it." She fell silent, watching him as he checked his rifle and set extra rounds on the table. The way he moved, calm, steady, deliberate, told her this wasn't the first time he'd faced danger. She wanted to ask about his past, about the scars on his hands and the faraway look in his eyes. But she didn't. Not tonight. The rain started a little after sunset. First a few drops, then a steady pour that hammered the roof and filled the air with the smell of wet earth. The sound covered the small noises inside. The click of metal, the shuffle of boots, the low creak of wood. It should have made her feel safer, but it didn't. The rancher placed 2 lanterns near the windows and dimmed them to a soft glow. "Light'll make it harder for them to see in," he said. "But easier for us to see out." She nodded, her fingers twisting the edge of her sleeve. "You think they'll come tonight?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he moved to the door, listening to the storm. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. "Men like that don't wait. They'll come while the weather's on their side." Hours passed slow and tense. The fire burned low, and the only sounds were the rain and the wind. Lydia sat by the hearth, her eyes heavy with fear and exhaustion. The rancher stayed near the window, his rifle resting across his knees. Then, sometime near midnight, he heard it. A faint clink, like metal striking wood. His head snapped toward the sound. He stood silently, motioning for Lydia to stay still. The noise came again, closer this time. A boot against the porch step. His hand tightened around the rifle. He could see a shadow move outside the window, just a flicker there and gone. Then another. They were here. The rancher moved quietly to the door, signaling for Lydia to hide. She slipped behind the large oak chest near the wall, clutching her shawl tightly. He waited, breath steady, eyes fixed on the handle. Lightning flashed outside, bright enough to paint the yard in silver for a heartbeat. In that brief light, he saw 3 figures moving toward the barn, dark shapes against the rain. Another figure was closer, standing at the porch, reaching slowly for the latch. The door creaked. Before it could open, the rancher kicked it hard, slamming it back against whoever stood outside. A curse rang out, followed by a muffled thud. The rancher fired once through the opening, the sound loud and sharp in the storm. Someone shouted from the yard. Another gun went off in reply, the bullet splintering wood near the window. Lydia gasped softly from her hiding place. The rancher moved fast, shoving the table over and taking cover behind it. The storm outside roared, masking their movements. More footsteps splashed through the mud, closing in. "Come out, friend," a voice called from the darkness. "Ain't no need for this to turn ugly." The rancher recognized the voice. Dyer. Calm, smooth, but with that cruel edge underneath. "It's already ugly," the rancher called back. Dyer chuckled. "You got spirit, I'll give you that, but you're in the way of something bigger than you understand. Hand her over and we'll let you walk." The rancher leaned closer to the window. "You tell Carver if he wants her, he can come get her himself." Another shot cracked the air, shattering one of the lanterns. Glass scattered across the floor. Lydia ducked lower, her heart pounding so hard she could barely breathe. The rancher fired back, the flash lighting up the room for an instant. He could see shapes moving through the rain. 3, maybe 4 men spreading out across the yard. They were trying to surround the cabin. He turned to Lydia. "Back door. Go now. Take the mare and ride north like I told you." Her eyes widened. "I can't leave you here." "You can and you will," he said firmly. "They want you, not me. If you stay, neither of us makes it out." Tears glistened in her eyes, but she nodded. "What about you?" He gave a small, tired smile. "Don't worry about me. I've faced worse odds." She hesitated for only a moment longer before slipping toward the back door, moving as quietly as she could. The rain covered her steps. Outside, another shot rang out. The rancher crouched low, firing twice toward the barn. One of the figures dropped with a grunt. The others ducked for cover. He could hear Dyer shouting orders over the storm. "Find the girl. Bring her back alive." The rancher's stomach twisted. They'd heard her leave. He moved fast, firing again to draw their attention. One bullet grazed his arm, burning hot. He barely flinched, reloading quickly. The storm was in full fury now, lightning flashing every few seconds, thunder shaking the ground. He could just make out Lydia's shape running toward the stables, her dark hair whipping in the wind. She was trying to untie the mare, fumbling in the rain. Then he saw one of Carver's men break from the tree line, heading straight for her. "Lydia!" he shouted, his voice barely cutting through the storm. She looked up, eyes wide. The man reached for her arm, but she swung the saddle horn at him, striking his shoulder. The rancher fired, the shot echoing across the plains. The man fell, disappearing into the mud. Lydia scrambled onto the mare, clutching the reins. The horse reared, frightened by the thunder, then bolted toward the north ridge. The rain blurred everything, but he could still see her silhouette racing through the storm, small and defiant against the wild sky. Dyer cursed loudly from somewhere behind the barn. "After her! Don't let her get away!" The rancher ducked as another bullet hit the doorframe beside him. He fired back, forcing them to take cover. For every man that went after Lydia, one stayed behind to keep him pinned. He could feel his strength draining, but he refused to back down. He'd lived most of his life alone, without reason to fight for anything. But now, with Lydia out there riding for her life, something inside him had changed. He wasn't going to let Carver's men win. Not tonight. He waited until he heard the sound of hooves fade into the distance, then slipped out the side window, landing hard in the mud. The rain hit his face like cold needles. He moved along the wall, keeping low. He could see Dyer and two others near the barn, shouting to each other. They didn't know he'd moved. Slowly, silently, he raised his rifle. Lightning flashed, illuminating their faces. Dyer looked older now, his expression twisted with anger. The rancher aimed, steady and sure, and fired. One of the men dropped. The others ducked, returning fire blindly. He moved again, circling toward the fence. His arm throbbed where the bullet had grazed him, but he kept going. His only thought was of Lydia. If she'd made it to the ridge, if she'd found the canyon trail before they caught her. A flash of movement caught his eye. One of Carver's men was creeping around the barn trying to flank him. The rancher turned just as the man raised his gun. They fired almost at the same time. The man fell. The rancher staggered back, clutching his side, his breath shallow. The pain flared sharp, but he forced himself upright. He couldn't stop. Not yet. The rain was easing now, turning to a soft drizzle. The storm was passing, but the danger wasn't. He could hear Dyer's voice again, shouting orders, calling for reinforcements. Somewhere beyond the ridge, a horse cried out. A sound carried faintly through the mist. Lydia. The rancher looked toward the north, his jaw tightening. He grabbed his rifle, his coat heavy with rain, and started toward the sound. Every step hurt, but he kept moving. The plains stretched before him, wide and dark, the horizon glowing faintly with the first hint of dawn. He could see tracks in the wet earth, hoofprints leading toward the canyon, and beside them, another set of boots following close behind. He wiped the rain from his face, his heart pounding hard. They were chasing her, and he was going after them. The wind picked up again, carrying the echo of hooves and voices through the still air. The rancher tightened his grip on the rifle and pressed on into the gray light, the card in his pocket sticking to his chest with the rain. He didn't know what waited beyond that ridge, only that everything was about to come to a head, and before the sun rose over the plains, someone wouldn't be coming back. The first pale light of dawn broke across the horizon, spilling a soft gold over the plains. The storm had passed, leaving the land slick with rain and mud. The rancher moved carefully, following the hoofprints that cut a narrow trail through the canyon grass. His side still throbbed from the graze he had taken, but he pushed on. Lydia's tracks were ahead, clear against the soaked earth, and that was all that mattered. The canyon narrowed as he advanced, the walls rising steep and close. echoing with the distant sound of a horse's hooves. He slowed, moving cautiously, rifle ready. Somewhere further down he could hear voices. Shouts and curses carried faintly through the morning mist. Carver's men were still in pursuit, and they weren't far behind. Suddenly, Lydia appeared. Around a bend, her mare breathing hard, ears flicking nervously. Relief washed through him. She was still in one piece. She caught sight of him and gave a small, fleeting smile. Her fear still there, but mixed with trust. "Go left," he whispered urgently. "There's a narrow pass up ahead. It'll slow them down." She nodded and steered the mare, following his instructions. The rancher kept a steady pace behind her, keeping low and moving silently. The canyon walls grew taller, jagged rock forming natural barriers. It was the perfect place to make a stand. As they reached the pass, two of Carver's men appeared from the far side, their guns drawn. The rancher fired first, striking one in the shoulder. The man yelped and stumbled, disappearing behind a boulder. The second returned fire, forcing him to duck low, the bullet sparking against the canyon rock. Lydia guided the mare past a narrow ledge, the animal's hooves slipping slightly on the wet stone. The rancher followed, taking careful aim at the remaining man. He fired again, and the man fell, unable to continue the chase. For a moment, everything went quiet. The wind swept through the canyon, carrying the smell of wet earth and dust. Lydia's chest rose and fell, the mare snorting as it slowed to a walk. The rancher exhaled, muscles tense from hours of running and fighting. "Are we safe?" she asked quietly, still holding the reins tightly. "For now," he said, "but Carver's not going to give up that easy." They moved further into the canyon, the walls shielding them from view. The rancher scanned the terrain, noting hidden paths and small caves that could provide cover. "We need to get to the ridge above," he said. "From there, we can see them coming before they see us." The climb was slow, the rocks slick from the rain. Lydia followed closely, the mare careful with each step. Once they reached the ridge, the view opened up. The plain stretched wide below them, empty except for the faint tracks of the men who had been chasing her. The rancher crouched beside Lydia, pointing toward the far horizon. "They're down there regrouping. They'll try again. But now we have the advantage." She nodded, taking a deep breath. "What do we do now?" "We wait," he said simply, "and we make sure they don't get past us." Hours passed. The sun climbed higher, and the heat of the day began to dry the canyon walls. Carver's men appeared at the base of the ridge, scanning the area. The rancher kept quiet, moving only when necessary to keep an eye on them. Lydia sat beside him, exhausted but alert. Finally, a rider appeared in the distance, galloping fast across the plains. The rancher squinted. The figure approached, carrying a bundle of papers. As it drew closer, he realized it was a messenger from Miles City, sent by the marshal. The papers were official, stamped with authority. The messenger reached them and dismounted, handing over the bundle. Lydia's hands shook as she opened it. "The marshal. He knows everything," she whispered. "He can bring Carver down." The rancher allowed himself a brief smile. The threat was far from over, but at least now there was a way to stop it. The papers were proof, enough to take to the authorities and end Carver's operation. "Then it's done," the rancher said quietly. "We just need to get this back safely." They rode carefully down from the ridge, staying hidden as much as possible. Carver's men had regrouped, but they were spread thin, unsure of where Lydia and the rancher had gone. The element of surprise was theirs now. As they reached the outskirts of a small valley, the rancher noticed movement in the distance. One of Carver's men had spotted them. He fired a warning shot, and the man ducked back behind cover. The chase was nearly over, but he didn't let his guard down. Not yet. When they finally reached a safe distance, the rancher and Lydia set up a temporary camp. The mare drank from a stream while they checked the papers and secured them. Lydia's hands were still trembling, but there was a sense of relief in her posture. For the first time in hours, she allowed herself to relax. "You did all this for me," she said softly, her voice carrying both gratitude and disbelief. The rancher shrugged. "I didn't do it for you. I did it because you deserved a chance. No one should be hunted like that." She looked at him, understanding in her eyes. I think I think I finally understand you. All this time you've been living out here alone, waiting for something worth fighting for." He allowed a faint smile. "Maybe I was, or maybe I just didn't realize it until now." They shared a quiet moment, watching the sun climb higher. The plains stretched wide, endless and open, the wind rustling through the grass. Danger still lingered, but the immediate threat had passed. For the first time, there was hope. Hours later, the sound of horses approached from the north. The marshal's men had arrived, following the evidence Lydia had brought. They took Carver's men into custody one by one, rounding them up and securing the stolen goods. The rancher and Lydia stayed back, watching as justice was served. Lydia turned to him, a smile breaking through her fatigue. "It's over," he nodded slowly, still cautious. "For now, but the plains always hold surprises. That's the way of it." She laughed softly, a sound that carried lightly over the fields. "I suppose that's true, but I feel free, for the first time in a long while." He looked out over the land, taking in the vastness of the plains, the hills, and the horizon that seemed to stretch forever. "Freedom's a fragile thing out here," he said quietly, "but it's worth fighting for." They rode back to the ranch together, the morning sun warming their backs. The air smelled of earth and grass, of rain and life renewed. The mare's hooves splashed softly through the shallow streams, carrying them toward a place that had been their refuge, and now was a home again. When they reached the ranch house, Lydia dismounted, her legs weak but steady. The rancher helped her inside, setting the papers on the table. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other, knowing that the ordeal had changed both of them. "You saved me," she said finally, her voice soft. "I don't know how I'll ever repay you." "You don't have to," he said simply. "Just live. That's all the thanks I need." Outside, the wind shifted, gentle and calm now, carrying the scent of new beginnings. The storm had passed, the danger had been faced, and the plains were quiet once again. The rancher sat back in his chair by the fire, feeling the weight of the night lift slowly from his shoulders. Lydia moved about the cabin, tending to the small chores, but her presence brought a sense of life and warmth he hadn't realized he'd been missing. As the day wore on, they spoke quietly of the future, plans to send the papers to the marshal, to rebuild what had been disrupted, and to find some measure of peace in a land that had proven itself both beautiful and dangerous. They laughed softly at small things, the sound light and healing after the tension of the previous nights. By evening, the sun dipped low again, painting the plains in amber and gold. The rancher and Lydia stood on the porch together, watching the horizon stretch into forever. "Do you think it'll stay quiet now?" she asked. He gave a small shrug, eyes still on the endless land. "Quiet never lasts long out here. But maybe, just maybe, we've bought ourselves a little time." She leaned lightly against him, the weight of fear slowly lifting. "Then let's make the most of it," he nodded. For the first time in years, he felt the world opening up before him, not just the plains, but life itself. And in that moment, he knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. The wind blew softly across the ranch, rustling the grass and the old fence posts. Somewhere in the distance, a hawk called, circling high above. The land stretched wide, endless and free, and for the first time in a long while, the rancher felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. Hope. They stood together, silent, watching the sun dip behind the distant hills. The storm was over. The danger had passed, and on the plains of Montana, a quiet promise lingered in the air, one of survival, of courage, and of the life yet to come. The rancher and Lydia turned back toward the cabin, the day's light fading to twilight. The land around them was calm, but the lessons of the past days had left their mark. They knew the world could be harsh and unforgiving, but it could also be kind. They had faced the darkness together, and now, in the quiet after the storm, they would move forward, and somewhere deep down, the rancher understood something he had never allowed himself to before. That sometimes, the things worth protecting were not just the land or the livestock, but the lives that depended on it, and each other. The plains stretched endlessly before them, the wind carrying a soft promise of new beginnings, and as the stars began to appear, one by one over the Montana horizon, the rancher knew that for the first time, he had found a reason to hope, and a reason to stay.